Hi, this is Dr. Karen Wilson Starks, your host for the Voice of Leadership, the show for business executives and global corporations who appreciate a principled biblical lens on leadership, featuring the song Consuming Fire by gospel jazz saxophonist Ron McMillan. You are listening to our Resource Renewal Series featuring shows for times such as these. Today's segment is all about celebrating women, and March is the month for celebrating the contributions of women and particularly women's leadership. So what I want to do today is to share a bit about the women who have influenced my life and in some cases also my career path. And I'm going to go all the way back to the formative years and talk about those women first, and then come forward and share some more about women who came after the ones, the formative years. First, I will talk about my mother. My mother was a person who had the gift of conversation. She could speak and she could write and talk to anyone. Most of all, I remember her for her generosity and her thanksgiving. She was a person of tremendous gratitude. She was very, very generous with people. She was extremely creative, and she had the entrepreneurial spirit, which I'm sure I get that from her as well. If you had a way that was blocked or closed, that didn't stop her. She would find another way, a new way to do something. So nothing stopped the mother. She kept on going and was endlessly innovative. I also was shaped by my maternal grandmother, and my maternal grandmother had the gift of hospitality. She was an excellent, excellent cook, and no one was a stranger. She would always invite you to her home. There would be lots of people there, great food. You couldn't find better food anywhere. And she just enjoyed people, and she enjoyed sharing life with them. And so I know that there's a part of me that takes a cue from her cooking and also from her hospitality. And then on my father's side of the family, my paternal grandmother is the one who really was raised and grew up on a slave plantation. And she was an excellent homemaker because she was the one who took care of the plantation owner's home. So she was the one who did the cooking and the cleaning and everything. And Grandmother Rosa, she had a real bent for excellence in everything she did. She didn't have much. She was, in many ways, you would have to call her poor in terms of how my father grew up. Whatever she did have, though, she kept it in good condition. And she would take a broom and could do something with the broom that most people couldn't do with far more powerful equipment. So she didn't let any limitation stop her from taking pride in her home, excellence in her home, taking care of her family and her children. And she was a homemaker par excellence on all fronts. And then I want to mention my great aunt Jean. My great aunt Jean was the adventurer of the family, and she still is. She was the one who did all the international traveling. She was very avant-garde, very artsy. And if anybody was getting on, she was the first person I knew to get on an airplane and go places. And she was always going places on the airplane. And back in those days, when you could go to the airport and see people off, we would go down to the airport and see her off on her various adventures. For many, many years, she lived in California, and that was a very exotic place from our perspective, as we were from the East Coast, and, traveled widely and had new experiences and met new people. That was my maternal grandmother's youngest sister. And my grandmother, my maternal grandmother, she also was a person who could meet strangers and people from all over the place and really enjoyed that a lot. And I have a lot of those qualities from them as well. And then I'll mention my godmother, Aunt Julia. Aunt Julia, she had a level of excellence in everything she did too. There was always going to be high quality in all of her undertakings. I especially admired her home and her taste in furniture and in decorations. To this day, she and I still have very similar tastes to one another. And I remember once my mother going to my Aunt Julia's house and then coming to me and saying, your Aunt Julia has that same chair in her house that you have in your house. And sometimes my mother could exaggerate. So I thought she was really saying, oh, it was something similar. And not that it was exactly the same. But when I went to my Aunt Julia's house, she had the exact same chair. So we did have very similar tastes. We still do have similar tastes in various things. And Aunt Julia could do a little bit of anything. She could cook very well, especially baking. She makes the best crescent cookies that I've ever tasted in my life. I've always loved her crescent cookies that she made at Christmas time. She could sew, and when she made clothes for herself, they were beautiful. You would never know that they were made by anyone at home. They fit all the standards of professional tailoring, and that's how Aunt Julia is. And I really learned that excellence from her, high quality in everything that she did. Next, I'll mention Sister Dungy. Sister Dungy was one of the ladies of the church where I grew up, and she was older than my parents. So, in many respects, she was probably more like a grandmotherly kind of figure. And Sister Dungy was interesting because she was a librarian, a very learned woman. She was highly educated and she was a lifelong learner. She believed in continuing to learn everything. And for my environment, she was a healthy living person. So my grandmothers, both of them cooked traditional soul food kind of food. However, Sister Dungy had learned to take that food and somehow make it more healthy. And so instead of cooking the cabbage all the way until it died, she would cook it and it would have a little crunch to it. She wouldn't necessarily put the meat in it, and it was still delicious. So from her, I learned the beginnings of healthy living, and I would consider myself a gourmet health cook even to this day. She also was a godly woman, and everything that she did, she had a sense of doing things right as well. And I learned from watching her. My learning with her was a lot observational because in her house, I'd go over there and she might decide that day she's going to clean the stove or that she's going to clean out the kitchen fan, that's in the wall. She would take these things apart to the most minute detail that I didn't even imagine was even possible. And she would thoroughly clean all of these things. And at the same time, while she was cooking, cleaning, whatever she was doing, she would also be talking. We would be having conversations. And even though she was a much older woman, she was not behind the times. And what I mean by that is no subject was taboo for her. We even talked about things like, well, what if somebody sexually assaults you or does whatever? How to even survive and get out of that with your life. She talked to me about things like that, which was not common, but way back then at that time and for her age group in particular. What was also interesting in this mentoring relationship is she had me to co teach with her when she was teaching vacation Bible school for the first graders. And so I was a protege and I was learning how to teach others the Bible. And that has served me well all of these years in my life. Basically, I would say that she was a person who was a mentor and who came alongside me and just did life with me. I will always remember Sister Dungy as long as I can remember anything. She was a very important person in my life. Another woman from the church who I remember was Sister Hamlin. Sister Hamlin was a woman she was very beautiful, gorgeous face, and her husband was a professional musician. And she was a larger sized woman at that time. And back then, they really didn't have plus size clothing. I don't know where she went or how she got these things, but she managed to have the most beautiful clothes in the world. And they were fitted to her figure in such a way that they were extremely flattering. She was stylish, no matter what her size may have been, and her clothes were colorful. Because back at that time, if you could find anything for plus size women, it would be frumpy, it would be black or just dark and ugly. Nothing Sister Hamlin had was ugly, and she wasn't ugly. And I used to go to her house a lot after church on Sunday, and we would have lunch together. And so, what I learned from her is that beauty is in all sizes and shapes. do the best with what you have, because she maximized and highlighted the best of what she had. So in my life, some years postmenopausal, when I gained an extra 10 pounds, which really didn't look good on me, I just started a second wardrobe, a wardrobe for that size. And I also had a wardrobe for my regular size, and there were beautiful clothes in both wardrobes. I learned that from Sister Hamlin. And so, whatever size I was, I'd go to that closet and pull out something nice that I could wear no matter what. Early in my career as a psychologist, I would say I didn't see a whole lot of women role models. Back in the day, was mostly older men, and in my world in life, mostly older Jewish men. And the picture I have in my mind, they were wearing tweed sports coats with corduroy patches on their elbows. They were researchers, they were academics, or Freudian types who, if they were seeing clients and patients, you could imagine the client was laying down on the couch. That was kind of like my picture in the early days of psychology. So the women who influenced my life were mostly peers of mine. And we got together in peer scenarios and encouraged each other in that way. Two ladies in particular, we met monthly for a number of years. We were all consulting psychologists. We were peer role models, peer mentors to each other. And I tell you, I miss them to this day because of the ways that we would process cases that we were dealing with in our consulting practices and so on. Both of them have gone on and they have retired. And since I'm post retirement in a sense and still out here, they left me and they went on to other vistas, and they're no longer practicing and consulting. So, two wonderful ladies who I'll always remember. I remember when I was in graduate school, and this was, of course, before going into the field of psychology. I was studying psychology, and in graduate school, my faculty was all male. There were no women faculty. There were no people of color on the faculty. It was mostly a male role model again. So when I think about in the academic environment, the woman who comes to mind who was most influential for me goes back to high school, and she was my 11th grade English teacher, and her name was Mrs. Ellen Oberfelder. What a wonderful woman she was, and she insisted on academic excellence. She was great at English grammar and at literature. I loved literature, so I was fine on that part. Wasn't so crazy about English grammar, but she would not let you get away with anything. Mrs. Oberfelder would make you correct whatever the errors were. And so my papers would come back, red lines everywhere, torn up. And when I went to college later, I recognized what a gift it was that I had this training from Mrs. Oberfelder, and I still had to learn even more in college. And I said to myself, I probably should have paid more attention while I was in her class. But she probably, I would say, is the teacher who influenced me the most. And the learning from her, I still use today in the writing that I do in my work. Currently, I have also a group of women entrepreneurs that I meet with on a monthly basis, and I call them the Wise Women Group. Fabulous women. They're not psychologists like me. We're all in very different fields. However, they are an inspiration, and we encourage each other to really take big steps and to push ourselves beyond the normal boundaries to do something significant out there. I will say this, and most of you know this, I was an Army officer as well. And when I was in the Army, I would have to say the song that makes me think about the Army years was James Brown's song, It's a Man's World. And in his song, It's a Man's World. And he says, then the part of the refrain, though, he said, but it wouldn't be nothing, he says, without a woman or a girl. So this song that James Brown recorded, he recorded it first in February of 1966 in New York City. And he wrote the song with a woman named Betty Jean Newsom. So they wrote it together. And I think that's significant too. And when he's talking about It's a Man's World, he talks about all the things that men create, all the things that men do, how they purchase things from one another, they make toys for their children. But over and over, he says, but it wouldn't be nothing without a woman or a girl. And I think that that really is God's heart as well, that male and female together, man, we are the image and reflection of God. That's man and woman, which God called man. And so when we have both the male and the female energy operating together, it's a more complete picture of all the gifts and all the talents and possibilities that God has lent to a situation. So when I think back on the Army years, I think it was good to have a little bit of a feminine energy and perspective in those it's a man's world kind of rooms that I was in over all those years. Later on, when I was working at the Center for Creative Leadership and I was a faculty member there, in those early years, we would have classrooms of about 24 people for the leadership training programs that we did with corporate leaders. And at that time, out of 24 participants, there would be weeks there were no women at all, and other weeks when there were 1 to 4 women. If you had 4 women, wow, that was considered a lot. Mostly there were men in those jobs at the time. And so companies weren't sending women to these premier courses that were for executive level men. Well, I say executives, but they were mostly men at the time. So at one point, and I should mention, when we did training programs, there were usually 2 trainers at the same time for these leadership courses. So 2 men could train together. That was something that CCL found was appropriate for the marketplace. And a man and a woman could also train together. They did not pair 2 women together. So there was one week that came up, and I really believe there was a shortage probably of male faculty members and male personnel. And so my colleague, Dr. Roberta Krause, she and I, we said, we can do this program. There's no reason why 2 women can't train this leadership program. And so they were reluctant to have us go out there and do it. However, we did it. We ran that program for the week, mostly men in the class, although there were a few women as well. And we didn't disclose to the class until the end, at the very end of the week on the last day, that this was the first time in the history of the Center for Creative Leadership that 2 women were training together. And they were shocked. And they said, as far as they were concerned, it was an excellent experience. And they just couldn't imagine that they would have a class that didn't have the 2 of us. And so after that, we broke that ground, and female-female pairings continued after that time. So I would always say, too, that in my career and in my life, I've always been a pioneer, probably on the front lines of doing something that was being done for the first time. And so that isn't just an example. Also want to mention a colleague of mine who's been a friend and a role model in leadership. And her name is Juana Bordas. And Juana is a powerful Latina woman. She's an immigrant to the United States, and her family was from Nicaragua. I met her first at the Center for Creative Leadership when she came there, and she was already a powerhouse in her own right. And she was the founder of Mikasa Women's Center, the founder of the National Hispana Leadership Institute. Over the years, she has been an advisor to the Kellogg Fellows Program, a past vice president of the Greenleaf Center for Servant Leadership, and she's one of 50 leaders that was chosen by the Colorado legislature to design the state's future plan. She's won all kinds of awards, all kinds of acknowledgments as outstanding woman in business, the Colorado Women's Hall of Fame, so many that I can't name them all. She's also an author. Her first book was Salsa, Soul, and Spirit, which was award-winning. She's written a number of other books and has just released a new book, The Power of Latino Leadership Ahora, and Ahora meaning now. What I learned from my colleague Juana was the importance of and the power of community building and community caring. She's quite an organizer and an activist, and is serious about building capacity in the Hispanic community. She's a real champion for multicultural leadership, understanding that many different cultures have ways of leadership that have existed for generations. And these are powerful models that if we were to use them today and to have a more collaborative framework, it would serve us well in the corporate boardrooms as well as in nonprofit arenas. So she is a great friend of mine and a great inspiration when it comes down to being on the front lines and thinking differently about so many things. She and I have had a chance over the years to partner together to do some significant work, many projects, and I'll just mention one because it leads into the next person I want to mention. Juana and I did a number of high-level leadership programs for nonprofit leaders, community leaders these programs were funded by the Texaco Corporation at first, and then later by Chevron Texaco, and later by Chevron. And they would reach out and find leaders in the community who they wanted to develop and who they wanted to resource at a high level. And we designed programs to equip these leaders. And as part of that process, we worked with Marshall Goldsmith, and we also worked with Frances Hesselbein. And I want to talk about Frances Hesselbein because she was there every time that we did these programs. She would come in, she would do a portion of it, and then she would leave. Juana and I, we were the continuing thread throughout the entire week. Now, Frances Hesselbein, she was born in 1915, and she just died in December of 2022 at 107 years old. When I was working with her, and she used to keep her age secret and under wraps, we estimate she was probably in her 80s and then into her 90s during the years that we were really working with her. The last time I saw her was on her occasion of her 105th birthday, when they did a virtual birthday party through the University of Pittsburgh, where her Leadership Institute resides at this point. And so Frances was there at the birthday party, 105 years old, and still looking glamorous and beautiful as ever. And what I really learned from Frances is, first of all, Frances was always herself. She would get this big chair, have you put the big chair out there, she would sit down and she would have a fireside chat with the leaders that she was speaking to. She came from a significant family legacy of impact. Even though she came from that older generation, she believed in diversity. She believed in inclusion. And when she became the CEO of the Girl Scout organization and was leading in New York City from the New York City office, it was her idea that the Girl Scouts really had to modernize and they had to keep up with the times. And what that meant was you had to move from the Betty Crocker days and the days of conformist approaches. And so she wanted the Girl Scouts to really get leadership development and training. She wanted them to learn about STEM subjects, the science and the technology, the engineering and the math. And she wanted the Girl Scouts to look good. So she hired Halston and Bill Blass to even design uniforms for the Girl Scouts. She was all about girls having an opportunity to be what they may not have even had a chance to be in the past. So she was very progressive minded, progressive in her thinking. And she led as the CEO from about 1976 until about, I think, 1990. And for her work, she got the Presidential Medal of Freedom from Bill Clinton, is the one who awarded her that medal because of her contributions. And that was in 1998. While she was the leader, she even added a dimension to the Girl Scouts and created the daisies. And the daisies were for kindergartners and first graders, so that even at young ages, she could reach a wider group of girls, including those who are in single parent homes, and build into them. So this is even a lower level than the brownies when she created the daisies. The other thing she thought was important was that when you opened up that Girl Scout book, you should be able to see yourself no matter who you were, what race or ethnic background you were from, how diverse you were. And so she insisted that there were multicultural pictures and depictions. And descriptions of different cultural traditions and backgrounds so that every girl could look at that manual, find herself, and want to be a part of the Girl Scouts. And as a result of her work, the Girl Scouts increased the number of girls of color to 15.5%, which was unbelievable at the time. And they also increased membership in general up to about 2.3 million members. So she was a consummate leader of gigantic and tremendous proportions all along the way. I would also say that following the Girl Scouts, she partnered with Peter Drucker, and they had a leadership organization together, and the foundation of it was nonprofit management. So she and Peter Drucker, they ran that foundation, the Peter Drucker Foundation, for years until he died in 2005. And then Frances Hesselbein continued to lead it. They renamed it Leader to Leader Institute. And then eventually the organization moved to the University of Pittsburgh as the Leadership Forum. And so she's been involved in leadership and public service for a long time. And in fact, I knew that she did a lot of work with the military, which was of interest to me since I had been a military officer. And what I didn't know is that she was actually at West Point in 1951. And this is quite significant. In 1951 at West Point, she was the chair for the study of leadership at the U.S. Military Academy in the Department of Behavioral Sciences and Leadership. And when I was at West Point, they still had that department at West Point. And she was the first woman and the first non-graduate to serve in that position. So 1951, that goes back quite a ways, that she was already on the front lines, leading in some unusual ways in some unusual places. She had a saying that pretty much characterized her and that everybody knows about her. And that is, she said, to serve is to live. That was her motto. I think that's pretty important. To serve is to live. And I think one of the reasons that I so admired Frances Hesselbein is because she had some values that were pretty profound, and they dovetail with my values as well. Her whole life is about to advance the art and science of leadership and public service. That's what she was really about. And she would say also that the bottom line is measured not in dollars and cents, rather in changed lives. And she also said, our times call for ethical leaders with a moral compass that works full time. Now imagine that if we had ethical leaders who had a moral compass that worked full time, what a beautiful world. This would be even more so than it is already. She also said that leadership is deeply personal and an act of love and care for others. I believe that too, that leadership really is about loving and caring for other people and creating the positive environments where they flourish and where they thrive and where profitability also happens as well. And Frances said, leadership is a matter of how to be, not how to do. It's all about being. And you need to be first. And from your being, then comes out what you ultimately end up doing. And about age, Frances says, age is irrelevant. It's what you do with your life that matters. Age is irrelevant. It's what you do with your life that matters. So whether you're young out there now and you're wondering, well, what do I have to contribute? Or if you're older like I am and you're thinking, do I still have anything to contribute? I would say yes, you have lots to contribute. And if you didn't, you wouldn't still be here on the planet. So God will keep you here as long as He says you have something to contribute. And look, Frances' life was dedicated to service, and she lived to be 107. There may be a formula in that in terms of longevity. I'll leave that for you to think about. What I want to close with today are some verses from Acts, the 2nd chapter, and starting with verse 17. And Peter is speaking, and he says, he's reminding the early church of some prophetic words that first appeared in Joel, the 2nd chapter, verses 28 through 32. So this is an Old Testament prophecy. And it says, "And it shall come to pass in the last days, says God, that I will pour out of my spirit on all flesh. Your sons and your daughters shall prophesy. Your young men shall see visions. Your old men shall see dreams. And on my men servants and on my maid servants I will pour out my spirit in those days, and they will prophesy. I will show wonders in heaven above and signs in the earth beneath, blood and fire and vapor of smoke. The sun shall be turned into darkness and the moon into blood before the coming of the great and awesome day of the Lord. And it shall come to pass that whoever calls on the name of the Lord shall be saved." And I just draw your attention to the fact that God's plan always, from the beginning, was to pour out his spirit on all flesh, men and women, that his kingdom might advance on the earth with all of the talent that he's put in both men and women. So as we celebrate women's leadership, please remember it was God's idea first. Enjoy this month. Celebrate the women leaders around you. My guest today is Army Captain Deshauna Barber. In 2016, she was crowned the first soldier to win the prestigious title of Miss USA. She currently serves as the president and chief executive officer of Service Women's Action Network, the nation's leading 501c3 nonprofit organization advocating on behalf of all service women and women veterans in the country. Captain Barber has served her country for over 9 years and now works as cadet instructor at Howard University's Bison Battalion during her Army Reserve commitment. As Miss USA, she spent her year-long reign advocating for our men and women in uniform by encouraging our government to provide more support for soldiers suffering from post-traumatic stress disorder and other post-deployment and service-related mental health conditions. She also partnered with and lent her voice to organizations such as the USO, Smile Train, Best Buddies, and Operation Homefront. Captain Barber is currently receiving her Diversity, Social Justice, and Inclusion certification at the University of Colorado, Colorado Springs. She has a Bachelor of Science degree in Business Management from Virginia State University and a Master of Science degree in Computer, Information Systems, and Services from the University of Maryland, University College. She worked as an IT analyst in the United States government for over 7 years, being employed by agencies such as the Department of Defense, Department of Transportation, Department of the Navy, and the Department of Commerce. When she's not serving her country, she travels the world as a full-time motivational speaker. She uses her experience as an Army officer, former Miss USA, and STEM graduate to inspire, encourage, and strengthen others. As a top-rated speaker, she's widely sought by Fortune 500 companies and has appeared on major shows such as The Steve Harvey Show, The Rachel Ray Show, Fox and Friends, The Ellen DeGeneres Show, The T.D. Jakes Show, and Good Morning America. It is my distinct honor and pleasure to have you, Captain Barber, as our guest on The Voice of Leadership. Welcome.
Thank you for having me. It was a long bio right there.
Well, you've accomplished a lot in a brief period of time. And I certainly wanted, my guests to get a picture of everything. Well, not everything even, but a lot that you've done. And also, as a former Army officer myself, I was just very delighted to learn about you and your unique experiences. So let's just jump right in. Yeah, let's just jump right in. So what I wanted to first mention, certainly this intrigued me when I think about it. At first glance, you being in the Army and you being a science, engineering, technology, and math type, this seems very far removed from the world of beauty pageants and Miss USA. So how did you get interested in such diverse pursuits?
I think it kind of came out of nowhere because, to be honest, the desire to join the military is something that I had very young. My father and mother both served in the U.S. Army. So that was something that was my first desire. And then STEM is something that also was something that I knew I was going to be passionate about once I entered into Virginia State University. And I saw the economy and I saw just the way that technology is shifting and it's becoming a huge part of our day to day. So I knew that computer information systems and services was going to be something that wouldn't die out and would be a necessity for most business processes and corporations and the way that they function. Now, pageantry, on the other hand, came out of nowhere. I have a specific speech that's on Goldcast right now and is getting really good numbers. So people may have already heard a portion of this, but I was actually discovered in Target when I was 19 years old. So pageantry kind of came on the back end of my passions and the things that I planned to do in life some years ago. And they are two different sides of the spectrum, I would say. But I do think that being in STEM and being in the military and being a pageant girl, you really get a chance to see that women have so many different sides to themselves. We're all multifaceted and we have so many passions, and some are like water and vinegar where they just don't mix, but they still have their own level of similarity. So I feel like I just am very multifaceted. I have a level of passion within me that allows me to be so open-minded to different experiences, which is why I'm okay with being having my foot in so many different pots.
It's interesting when I hear you say multifaceted, it makes me think about a diamond, or a gemstone that reflects light from so many different directions and so many different places. So that's actually a really nice picture of the difference in what you're doing. So let me ask this, and how have you leveraged, if you will, the power and the exposure of both the military officer platform, that's one facet, and then the Miss USA platform for mutual benefit, which is another facet. So how have you leveraged the power of those?
I think I've leveraged it with my speaking career. And that's what I was saying about my bio. I give this bio out to every single event. And they always say it. And every time I get up to the mic, I'm like, wow, that was so much. Because I say it kind of as a compliment to myself in a way that really just reflects the fact that I have really done so much in such a short 30 years of life. And I'm always very shocked, even when I hear it myself. I'm like, gosh, Deshauna, you made so many strides in life. I find that the way that I leverage being a former Miss USA and being in the military, I've leveraged it by being a speaker. And I've leveraged it by showing, and majority of my speeches are all based on either leadership or women empowerment and diversity and inclusion. So all three of those things are my top topics. And also one is breaking the molds, like breaking through the glass ceiling, things along those lines, where I think that I speak that mostly to our young people, because I feel like sometimes, especially as a young person, we're taught to believe that there's one way of functioning in life. There's one way to success. There's only one direction. There's only one way to get to the things that you want to get to, and that's through college, through school, getting your 9 to 5, and kind of just having the white picket fence, the family, and things along those lines, which is always a great way to achieve your goals, and that's the lifestyle that most people want to live. I think that for me, being Miss USA and being in the military, it kind of shows that we're allowed to be different, we're allowed to be unique in the things that we want to do in life. And it's very important to think about quality of life when we think about what it is that we want to do. I try not to allow the opinions of others to steer what it is that I want to do, because at the end of the day, and I say this in my speeches, if I had listened to the whispers in my ear and to the gossip and to the people that didn't support my decision, I wouldn't be where I am today. So I use both the military and being Miss USA to show that we're literally allowed to be any and everything that we want to be in life. And I push that in my speeches because I think that a lot of the times people are on the straight and narrow, and they have passions and desires and things that they want to do in life, and they have hobbies or they want to open a business, or they want to become a musician, they want to become a singer, but Society is telling them not to do that because this is what you need to do to be a woman in America, or be a man in America, or be, a lawyer in America. It's like we're placing ourselves in a box. I think showing the two different dynamics to those careers allows people to see that, wow, you can be a soldier and a beauty queen. It shows that you can be anything that you want to be, no matter how opposite they are.
Well, that's really significant because you are being a role model for being able to create your own path, if you will. And I always have a statement that I talk about which says run your own race. It may not be exactly the same race as what other people are doing, but it's certainly the one that you choose to run. So I want to ask you something about that. We know that being an Army officer in and of itself, and particularly you were a commander at the time, you were also a pageant queen. So talk to us about the biggest hurdles that you experienced in balancing those two positions and even in being successful in both.
It was difficult. I definitely had a large level of hurdles, mostly because when you're in the military, again, there is a box placed on you, especially as women. There are these expectations, and I often think at times people forget that we're women when we're in uniform. So when they see you in a swimsuit on the beach, they're like, whoa, too much skin, guys. And it's like, we're still women, and we're allowed to have moments of what we would define as large level femininity, which people would say being in a pageant is the most girliest girly thing you could do in the world. But I think that by being able to show them and show even my soldiers that, don't put yourself in a box. And I think that was my biggest hurdles, are other leaders and peers of mine that were also commanders that did not agree with my choice of competing in pageants and being such a public reflection of an Army officer. To be honest, a lot of this doesn't sound the greatest, and I was actually shocked by it. A lot of the backlash that I did get was from female military officers or just from female soldiers. And I read a few articles because there were a few. I know there was a Marine. I'm not going to say what the blog's name is. I forgot it at this point. She wrote a very long article about how my Miss USA win was setting the female soldiers, setting us back in terms of being women and being treated as equal within the military. It's a very long blog, which I took the time to read. And I thought she was giving me a little bit too much credit personally for believing that my one Miss USA win was going to be this negative impact on females in the military. But I think that was probably my biggest hurdle, is getting over judgment, and getting over judgment from people that did not understand or agree with what it is that I do. And I think that I don't really care much about judgment. I care about making sure that I don't have any regrets in life, that anything that I've ever wanted to do, I have at least tried to do, which is why my mantra is always do not fear failure, but please be terrified of regret. If I decided not to compete for Miss USA, I would be thinking about it for the rest of my life and wondering, what if I had actually tried? So I think the biggest hurdle is definitely judgment, is being in the public eye, and it's wanting to make an impact on lives, knowing that some people don't support you. And, it's not really for everyone to understand at the time. And I think that I've been able to transition that position as Miss USA to doing what I'm doing now, which is being the CEO of a nonprofit that's focused on female veterans and female service members. So to me, I had a plan the whole time. Whether people agreed with it or understood it wasn't really the priority of myself. And if I could say anything to your viewers, it would be to do what you want in life, as long as it's not disrespectful or a direct impact on other people. You have to do what you love, and you have to be willing to accept the judgment that comes with it, because people are going to have their opinions no matter what.
There are a couple of things I want to jump in on, and as far as what you're saying, and that is, I remember when I was active duty in the Army, and one of my assignments was with the 1st Infantry Division at Fort Riley, Kansas. And so we wore, combat boots every day and the battle dress uniform or the green fatigues before that and so on. And I remember because I've always been a very feminine type. So being in the Army was sort of like unusual. People would not expect me to be in the Army if they just saw me. In fact, if I was in the airport in a uniform, a Class A uniform at the time, people always thought I was a flight attendant rather than an Army
Mm.
officer. But what I recall is that that was the first time in my life that I bought pink high heels to wear in my off-duty time, just to stay in touch with the feminine side, because every day I was sort of like in a real male dominated world and a masculine sort of world. And so it's important not to be in the box, as you say, but to
Yeah.
actually, I'll say, exercise all parts of yourself and who you really are and not lose any aspect of that. So I want to jump into this a little bit because I think some of that judgment you were talking about is that there are often stereotypes or misconceptions about pageant girls or women in the beauty industry. What are some of those big misconceptions such that people might even have gone to judgment?
I would definitely say the top one is that we're airheads, quote unquote. That is always going to be the top misconception of pageant girls, is that we are unintelligent, and is the most insulting assumption of all time. I have been on stage with the Miss USA that we crowned after me was a scientist. I've been on stage with women that have worked for NASA, pilots, mathematicians. I have been on stage and competed against women that I by far think are the smartest women on the planet personally. So, I think that's the top misconception. And then I think the second misconception is that we are not independent and we're not working women. There
Mm,
is this very traditional umbrella that falls over pageantry because it comes from a very traditional period of time in the early 1900s, where you have women, which is when these pageants were founded, where you have women that are stay-at-home mothers. So a lot of the previous pageant queens early on in pageantry, almost all, if you watch, if anyone decides to go back through and watch through history, they'll ask the women, so what do you do and how are things, oh, well, I have, I'm a stay-at-home wife right now, and what do you like to do? Oh, I like to cook pancakes and bake cakes. So usually it's a very traditional space to where women historically were almost never in a career, and majority of their focus was not to be in a career at that time. And that was really what was highlighted when it comes to pageants that were telecasted. They were almost always women that were focused on, what's your hobby? Oh, I like to play tennis, and things along those lines. And there's nothing wrong with that, but it has transitioned over time to where very career driven women have been attracted to pageantry. And a lot of us, the questions are now, so what do you do? Oh, I'm a nuclear scientist. And oh, okay, well, where'd you go to school? I went to Yale. Like, that's becoming a very common portion of pageantry. So yes, the misconception is absolutely that we're not career driven women, that we're unintelligent, we're not smart, and that we don't have ambition is a huge portion, where that we're not well traveled, that we can't hold a conversation unless we're talking about what's your favorite baking set. Like, that's usually a lot of the questions that I would get very early on until they highlighted my military career would be, so, I heard that you have a dog. What's the dog's name? It's like, what does this have to do with, what it is that I want to do with the PTSD and the impact and the platform that I want to make? So I love that pageantry is transitioning to highlighting the careers and the ambitions of the women that compete on stage.
Well, I'm really glad that you were starting to talk a little bit about the PTSD part, because I know that in terms of your own personal platform, you actually pursue many topics. For example, you already mentioned leadership, diversity, and inclusion, and also quality of life, which in your particular case, you have a personal passion for mental health. And since I'm a psychologist and I was also an Army psychologist, that greatly interests me. So tell us a little bit about how your personal journey informed your passion for addressing mental health concerns of soldiers.
Well, I've had a few experiences myself, especially as a commander. I've dealt heavily with soldiers that are suffering from post-traumatic stress disorder. My father and my brother have severe post-traumatic stress disorder. Just so people get a little bit of background, my father, mother, sister, and brother are all Army veterans, and my stepmother as well. So there's 5 of us total that have served, or 6 actually, if we include my stepmother. So I'm very highly impacted by the things that happen within the military and deployments and experiences. So what hit me the hardest when it comes to why I have a passion is because of my personal experience. I see what my dad battles with. I know that he's, deployed so many times, being in special forces, and he has his triggers. And most soldiers, a lot that have come back from deployment, have their triggers. And I think that because the quote unquote statistic that 22 veterans a day commit suicide, these are statistics that I have to experience because of the fact that I'm constantly surrounded not only by veterans, but I'm surrounded by service members when I'm serving in the reserve. And also because I remember there was a training that I had, it's called BOLIC, it's Basic Officer Leadership Course. This was back in 2012, and someone in our class committed suicide in his hotel room, hung himself in his hotel room. It was my very first training after commissioning. Although I didn't know the soldier personally, our entire class was required to go to his funeral. And I remember them playing taps and his family being at the front of the church. And I've never cried so hard in my life, especially when it comes to someone that I didn't know. But I could see that we're all here in uniform and here supporting someone that we don't know, but we all stand for the same goal. We all have the same mission, and we all have the same love for this country. So what can I do as an individual to make sure that our veterans never feel like they are forgotten once their service has completed? That's really kind of been my focus, and what kind of drives me, and what made me want to be in this nonprofit, and what makes me as a speaker constantly have this conversation, because I think that that's what can impact a soldier's decision or anyone's decision, or at least I hope it can, which is by encouraging them to know that we care as a society.
I think that's really significant, meaning that you are using your platform to address issues that are real and that are important. And a lot of times we think about the life and death aspect of war in terms of being on the battlefield directly itself. But you're saying even once the soldiers come back, or even when they're in garrison and someone is suicidal or whatever the situation may be, we still have a responsibility as a country and as a society to care for those who have made great sacrifices in caring for us. And so that really does make what you do very special. It's not selfish, it's not self-focused and oriented, but you're reaching out to make a better world in terms of the people you touch, the lives that you touch. That's what I'm hearing.
Yes, that hits the head on the nail. Yes, absolutely. Thank you for that. That brings it into a nutshell. I'm a bit long-winded, as you can tell. I'm trying to condense it, but you're able to put it into to shorten it up. So I appreciate that.
That's good. That's wonderful. And I know that you have so much more that you could share with other people. And so anyone who would like to contact you for a future speaking engagement, how do they get in touch with you?
Absolutely, yes. If anyone wants to reach out to me in terms of speaking, my website is deshauna.com. So it's D as in Delta, ESHAUNA.com. My calendar is up there, and steps to book me is as well on the website. Also, just social media wise on Instagram, LinkedIn, Facebook, and Twitter, although I'm not really on Twitter that often, but if you're on Twitter, it's all at Deshauna Barber.
Fantastic. Now, I know that you do speak to Fortune 500 audiences and that you, as an Army officer yourself, You're also a nonprofit CEO. So you've got lots of experiences. So what words of wisdom do you have for my audience? And my audience is principally executive business leaders. What words would you like to leave with them?
What I would like to leave with your audience is something that I speak on often when it comes to the events that I speak at, especially those that have leaders. I think that leadership is one of those things where it's not necessarily based on your position. It's based on how you impact the lives of others. If I could tell our leaders anything, I would tell them that responsibility represents your duty. Accountability signifies your compassion. I find that those that are in executive and high level positions, we oftentimes want to know what people are doing, but rarely do we consider how people are doing. And I think that that's what separates us as leaders from not only caring about the actions that contribute to the functioning of our businesses, but also about the people that we lead. How is their family? How are they personally? Are they hanging in there in terms of mental health? And I find that because it is that I'm so passionate about post-traumatic stress disorder, I think about these things and I think about quality of life. So if I could leave them with anything, I would say do not only be concerned about what people are doing, be concerned about how they are doing, because that to me represents what a leader is. It's someone that cares and someone that wants employees and team members and colleagues to walk into work and not only be satisfied with their work environment, but feel satisfied with how this work environment is positively impacting their lives.
Thank you for sharing those words of wisdom. And I'm going to punctuate them by saying to the audience who's listening out there today, just remember, when you are a leader, you're called to take care of those that you lead. You're called to care and to have compassion and to pay attention to how you are impacting the lives of others. In other words, leadership is a high call. It's about more than the what. It's about more than the business action. It's about the people who serve every day and make you and your business successful. So, Captain Barber, thank you for leaving those words of wisdom with my audience today. And to everyone out there, we'll see you next time.
Thank you so much.
Thank you for listening to The Voice of Leadership with me, Dr. Karen Wilson Starks. I am also your concierge executive leadership advisor for when you need to make tough business decisions, facilitate executive succession and transition, develop your executive team, lead change, create a positive and profitable culture, or leverage marketplace creative advantage. You can reach me at Dr. Karen, Karen, at transleadership.com. Also go to my website, transleadership.com, for more leadership resources and insights. I want to give special thanks to Ron McMillan, gospel jazz saxophonist and national Billboard recording artist, also known as Mr. Sirius XM Jazz Watercolors, for allowing us to use his gifted music on our show. Thank you for joining me today, and I'll see you next time.